Power of the elements? More like power of the earth? Or power of the dirt? I don't know. But what I do know is that this set gave us a ton of new support for earth monsters. You've got the Ursa version of Wind Channeler, this little creature which gives you an extra normal summon for earth monsters, both of which give some good generic support for earth monsters. But more importantly, we have an entire new archetype that's basically just generic earth support, the Vernusylphs. While they do become their own proper archetype next main set when they get their actual boss monster, for now they work best when combined with other earth archetypes. The one we'll be using is Karakuri. Now I've made a Karakuri deck profile before, but ever since Auroradon got banned, it just really doesn't work any longer. The Karakuri deck can do a ton of cool combos, but they lack the starters since only one of their main deck monsters can actually special summon itself. Combining them with Vernusylphs luckily does fix that. They have 3 monsters that we'll be using in this video, and they all work in more or less the same way. You discard an earth monster and itself, then you do something specific to that card, and then you finally revive an earth monster from the graveyard. Not only is that a free special summon of any earth monster in your hand, but the extra things each one does are pretty cool too. You have Vernusylph of Awakening Forests, who Foolish Burials any earth monster, which in our case will often be an Infinitrack Tunneler. That just means that, later in our combos, we just get a free draw 2, as well as recycling 5 monsters. You can burn through a ton of monsters in your Karakuri combos, so this is very easy to pull off and actually lets you combo further by recycling your Karakuri Gammas. Then you have Vernusylph of Flowering Hills, whose extra ability is to search another Vernusylph. This means more access to forests, who gets you to free draw 2, etc. When put together, it's actually pretty consistent. Then finally you have Vernusylph of Thawing Mountains. This one simply draws a card when you pull its effect off. Now you may have noticed that this all involves a lot of drawing. This goes nicely with the level 8 Karakuri Synchro, who is also a non-hard once per turn draw. To complement this, we run a ton of extenders that will make your combos just keep going on and on. The downside is that, as you may have noticed, Vernusylphs lock you into only being able to activate the effects of earth monsters during that turn. Luckily, this doesn't matter when going first. You can still just sit on a Baron or whatever else you want, since these will still be able to use their effects next turn. So let's look at how it all comes together. So here's the deck. As with pretty much any deck that's going to be using Vernusylph, you'll need to run a ton of earth monsters to actually get to use their full effects. Luckily, Karakuris already require that to work as a proper deck, so we're not really giving anything up. Let's start with the Vernusylph monsters. I run 3 of each forest, hills, and mountains, but I skip out on field since we're not using any of their spells and traps. Once they get their field spell next set, the bunny gets a lot better, but until then it's best skipped. Forest sends Tunneler most of the time, but Komechi is another good target if you have Merchant in hand and another Vernusylph to then summon it back, allowing the extra normal summon to be used at its best. Then we have the Karakuris. Strategist is at 1 to be a summon from your sync phase, since it will trigger the level 8 to draw a card, allowing you to extend even further. 3 Komechi, Merchant and Gamma are the core of the deck, and are all pretty necessary for any Karakuri deck. Merchant is way more useful in this build since you're more likely to have a free normal summon to then search their trap. We then run 1 Quick, 1 Watchdog and 3 Bones, mostly as targets for the sync phase to summon from the deck, giving you the right levels of tuner or non-tuner to make your plays. You could cut Quick if you really wanted to, but it just means you'll have to cut your combos short more often. Honestly, with all of the discards you'll need from the Vernusylphs, it's fine to run these extra few and then just discard them if you draw them. Then we have a little Infinitrack package of 3 Anchor Drill and 1 Tunneler. Anchor Drill is great because it triggers even when summoned off of a Vernusylph, and it's useful as any Karakuri tuner to make a synchro. Tunneler will end up recycling a ton of resources and drawing you 2 cards, and now since you don't even need to draw it, that will happen way more often. Then there's Ghost Bell. It's a hand trap that will help a bit against sprites, stopping them from reviving Toad, but also it's an earth tuner, so it's also usable in your combos if you really need it. Basically it's the middle ground between utility and not bricking your combos too hard. Now for spells, Cash is actually useful in this version of the deck, because you can get a Karakuri out with your Vernusylphs, and then use this to search a merchant, use your normal summon, and then search the trap. You could also search a Gamma Oil, who's best used on reviving a level 8 or 9 Synchro to get another draw or more interruption. Vedifusion is a really flexible extender for this deck, letting you get out a level 6 Earth Machine, which is really good for your Karakuri Synchro since they need an Earth non-tuner. Then you also have a level 5 or 2 tuner, which really lets you make basically anything you want. Drawing this at any point usually means you'll have another Synchro on board by the end, so it can be worth trying to trigger your level 8 draws just for this. Finally the Trap, which is basically an imperm that also shifts the Karakuri's battle position, giving you an extra draw or any number of banishes. It's always good to vary your interruption sources, and in this deck you can actually afford to search this pretty often, and because of that you only really need one copy. Now for the extra deck. First you'll have the 3 Vedifusion targets that I mentioned. Having 3 is pretty important for flexibility, so I do recommend it. Then run a Baron since it's your most reliable negate. For the Karakuri Synchros, run 3 level 9s, 3 level 8s, and then at least 2 level 7s. I run 3 just because other alternatives don't really come up very often. You could use a second copy of any of your one-offs, or something like an Naturia Barkion or a Hulk if you brick really hard and don't use a Vernusylph. Then Naturia Beast is here to shut down all spells, which is of course very powerful. Finally, Hope Harbinger turns 2 draws into a spell negate. Basically, you try to make your level 8 Karakuri Synchros, and then once they've used their draw effect, you can just overlay them into this to actually turn it into an interruption. It's less useful if you already have Naturia Beast, but against certain matchups it's very useful to try and make this. Now before I go into the combos, to address the obvious elephant in the room, yes, you can run Therions. 3 Regulus and 3 Colosseum can be a substitute for pretty much anything else in the deck, especially since Regulus is Earth. I have already shown off Karakuri Therion though, so I didn't want to do it again, but if you have the engine, do try and run it. I also want to mention that Urgent Schedule is a great card for when you have to go second, and this deck is pretty good at ATKing with just your Karakuris, so the downside doesn't really matter at all. Finally, Powertool Braver Dragon was revealed to be in this set by surprise, so while I wasn't really considering this during the testing phase, it could be an option. However, you will have to run some different equips, since it can't naturally equip Karakuri Gamma Oil, so you will have to change your deck up a bit if you want to try and use this. So now the combos. Before we start though, if you've been enjoying the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Here we'll start with Forests, discarding a drill to send a Tunneler. We'll revive the drill, letting us summon out Strategist, who is forced to trigger. We then make Grey, who summons Komachi, and then we'll use her extra normal summon on Merchant. That searches cash in before we make Baron. Vedifusion a Sea Monster to get a second Grey, the ladder up was a Toad. That's 5 Earth Machines in the graveyard, so we get Tunneler's Draw, which will get us both remaining Toads. That's pretty unlucky, but we can salvage it by getting a Quick from a Burebu, and then by simply normal summoning one of the Toads to make a Beast. That ends with an Omni Negate, any amount of spell negates, and then a targeted negate from a trap which will trigger a banish from Burebu. This second hand starts without very many monsters, so we'll use Mountains to try and draw one while also getting out a Toad. We do, and then we use Cash to search a Komachi, which we normal summon, to then summon Merchant and get Gamma Oil since we have the trap already. Those make a Beast, and then we can extend with a Steam Gyroid to get out a Bure. That will start laddering with Gammas up to the level 9, but we stop off to use its graveyard effect to draw with the level 8, getting us a Forests. Ending the ladder on a Komachi, we then use Gamma Oil to get back a level 7 and make a Baron. We then set the trap to end on the same board as last time, but with his Vernusylph ready in the hand for next turn. This time we'll start by normaling Drill, getting out a Bones. Then Hills discards Ghost Spell to search Forests, and since she's a tuner, we summon her back to make a Braider. That gets out Watchdog, and we make a second Braider, going into Strategist to get us 2 draws of Bones and Mountains. We now use Forest to send Tunneler and get our third Braider, before getting 2 more draws from Tunneler. They go into Baron, and then the bear draws 1 while reviving a level 9, letting us make a Hope Harbinger. We don't have the trap this time, and trade Beast for Hope Harbinger, but we can still get the Banish from Gamma's graveyard effect as an almost quick effect. And we also have a ton of follow-up for turn 3. For the final hand, we'll start with Bear again, discarding Komechi and drawing quick. We then use Cash on Komechi to get a Merchant who searches the trap. We can then tribute Merchant for the Tunneler in our hand, letting us go straight into Beredo. That summons a Merchant for a draw of Gamma Oil, and then Ready Fusion allows us to continue our combo thanks to Steam Gyroid. The Beredo we made gets a Komechi, and we still have a normal summon left for quick, so we use those two to make a Beret to start a Gamma ladder, up all the way into a Baron. With an unused Beredo on the field, we trigger a Gamma to get a draw, before triggering Tunneler to get 2 more draws. Making a Hope Harbinger, we can then start using the Vernusylphs to draw and extend further. Hills gets out a Komechi and adds a bear, while Forest sends a Toad to get out a Merchant. The Karakuris go into a Beast, and finally the Gamma Oil gets back a Berebu, ending on a board with Bahan's Omni Negate, Hope Harbinger's admittedly redundant Spell Negate, because of Beast's repeatable Spell Negate, and finally we also have the trap that is a negate while triggering a Banish. So that's the deck. Which engine do you prefer for Karakuris? This or Therion? Tell me in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. Special thanks to my tier 3 patron, Distran, as well as my tier 2 patrons, Jason Murat and Violet Vane. The link to that is in the description. Thanks for watching!